I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was a Tuesday, the kind where the coffee shop smells more like old pastries than espresso. I had just dragged myself in from the drizzle outside, coat damp at the collar, hair still sticking in little clumps, and there she was, leaning against the counter like she owned the place, except she didn't. Her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, just a little messy at the ends, the way it always did when she had been running errands or moving too fast to care. "Hey, Tom," she said, not a casual greeting, the kind you hear from strangers. She said it like she had been thinking of me yesterday, last week, maybe even last month. I froze for a second, then managed a nod. My voice came out softer than I wanted. "Hey, Mrs. Harper." She smiled, only the corners of her mouth, and I noticed the little crease near her eye. She had a habit of tapping her fingers on the counter when she was deciding something, like now, deciding whether she should notice me at all. She noticed me. "Your usual?" she asked. She didn't have to. I always got the same black coffee, and she knew it. "Yeah, thanks." I watched her hands fold around the cup, careful, deliberate. She turned to hand it to me, eyes flicking toward mine for the briefest moment. A shared joke, maybe in the way her lips twitched, but she said nothing. I found myself lingering, pretending to check my phone. Nothing there. Always nothing. A half-sent text to a friend I didn't feel like bothering, a draft that would never go anywhere. My thumb hovered over the keys longer than it needed to, and she didn't comment, just leaned a little closer over the counter, listening to some music only she could hear. The bell over the door jingled, and I realized I had been staring. She had noticed, of course, but said nothing. That silence, long enough to feel like it could break or hold, was its own conversation. I took the cup, nodded again. My coat brushed hers as I passed. Too close, not close enough. Outside, the rain had slowed, leaving the streets slick and reflective. I walked a few steps before realizing I wasn't leaving yet. Not really. I turned, saw her still behind the counter, small movements, fixing a stray napkin, her eyes catching mine for that heartbeat longer than necessary. I wanted to ask something stupid, meaningless, just to hear her voice, but my words stuck behind my teeth. So I said nothing. She smiled at something I didn't see, and I caught the soft click of her pen against the register. Quiet, ordinary, but somehow it pressed against my chest. I wandered to the edge of the street, hands stuffed in pockets, replaying the small details. The way she tilted her head, how she paused mid-laugh like she might regret it, the little crease between her brows when she concentrated. Ordinary, yes, but when it was her, it felt like trespassing just to watch. My phone buzzed. Unexpected, small, vibrating against my leg. A text from an unknown number, still awake. I froze, fingers curling around the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds, and then I realized I had no idea if she meant the coffee shop, the street outside, or something else entirely. I looked back at the shop window, her reflection soft in the glass, half smile lingering. My heartbeat caught somewhere between curiosity and caution. The rain glistened on the asphalt, each droplet a quiet reminder that some nights start like any other and end differently if you let them. And for reasons I couldn't name, I wanted to follow. The next evening, she invited me over to borrow a book, but I knew it wasn't just that. Her living room smelled faintly of old paper and cinnamon, the curtains drawn just enough to soften the streetlight. I kicked off my shoes, tried to act casual, and failed entirely. She handed me a mug of tea, fingers brushing mine briefly. Hot, herbal, comforting. I held it longer than I should, tracing the rim with my thumb while she returned to shelving some novels. She moved with that effortless, quiet grace, bending just slightly, her hair falling forward. I thought about reaching out, touching the strands back behind her ear, then laughed quietly in my own thoughts. "You always liked mysteries, didn't you?" she said, voice soft, like she was testing the waters of something larger than books. "Yeah, since high school, I guess," I said, watching her. She stopped mid-shelf, glanced at me, then nodded like she knew something I didn't. "I mean, it's silly, really. Everyone does, right?" She smiled, a little wry, and for a second the air seemed thinner. Not everyone reads alone on rainy nights. Her words weren't a tease. They weren't even a question, just a statement that landed. We sat on the couch, side by side, each with a mug in hand, not touching, yet aware of the small space between us. I imagined leaning closer, hearing the faint rustle of her cardigan, her breathing just slightly uneven. Then my brain slammed on the brakes. She was my friend's mom, divorced, living alone. I was 20. Nothing about this should feel like it could exist. Funny thing, she said, almost whispering, I used to make lists of all the books I wanted to read before I turned 40. Never finished the list. She laughed softly, a sound that made my chest ache in ways I didn't fully understand. And now here I am, still adding to it. I nodded, words caught somewhere between my throat and my mind. I keep notes too, on my phone, stuff I want to remember, things I never send anyone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a half second. She didn't ask what they were. Didn't need to. Silence fell between us, ordinary and yet loud. Steam rose from the mugs. The clock ticked, louder than it should. I wanted to say something reckless, something honest, but I didn't. Instead, I traced the edge of my mug with my finger, noticing how her gaze lingered for a fraction longer than polite. Finally, she reached over to push a small book closer to me. Our fingers brushed, a fleeting touch, but I felt the weight of it, the risk, the longing, the quiet acknowledgement that we were both aware of the line we weren't supposed to cross. She smiled faintly, a soft gaze, like she had just given me permission to think something forbidden. I caught myself staring at her hand for a second too long, then met her eyes and laughed softly, embarrassed. Thanks for the book. She tilted her head, just slightly, like she knew exactly why my heart had jumped, and said nothing. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I stopped by her apartment that Friday, thinking the rain might be a convenient excuse to linger. She answered the door with her usual soft smile, but something in her eyes was guarded, just slightly. She held the door longer than necessary, like she wasn't sure if she wanted me inside. Hey, I said. My voice was quieter than intended. I brought the book back. She nodded, stepping aside. Thanks. She moved a little stiffly, like her limbs didn't quite know the routine anymore. Her hair fell in her eyes. She brushed it back, but paused mid-motion, fingers trembling slightly. I stepped in, coat still damp, boots clicking against the wood floor. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and old paper. Same as before, but there was tension now. A tension I couldn't name at first, like static before a storm. We sat on the couch, mugs between us. I wanted to reach for her hand, to touch her just a little, but she angled herself slightly away. Not enough to be distant, not enough to be safe. I traced the rim of my mug, trying to slow my heartbeat, listening to the faint hum of her ceiling fan. Do you come here often? I asked stupidly, awkwardly. She didn't answer right away. She stirred her tea slowly, watching the spoon spin in the cup, eyes fixed on it, but not seeing. Sometimes, she said finally. Depends. Her tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't open either. I felt the pull, the hesitation. She wanted company, maybe, but not this. Not me, not like this. The silence stretched, and I noticed the little things. Her fingers tapping the mug, the way she glanced at the bookshelf behind me, the faint tremor in her lip. I imagined leaning in, the world narrowing, breath mingling, but stopped myself. Not yet. Not safe. A sudden knock at the door made both of us startle. Her eyes widened. She glanced toward the peephole, then back at me, a quiet panic flashing. It's just someone from downstairs, she murmured, though she didn't sound convinced. I nodded, heart still racing, and she handed me the mug to refill at the kitchen counter. Our hands brushed briefly, lingering, long enough to feel something shift. She stiffened, eyes darting away, then sighed. I didn't speak. Couldn't. I came back to the couch with the tea, setting it down gently. She sat very close now, knees almost touching mine, but her back was straight guarded. I wanted to reach, to close that last inch, but she pulled slightly back, not fully, not completely. For a moment, it was just the two of us, suspended in something fragile and urgent. I leaned in, just a fraction, tasting the thought of her hair brushing my cheek. Her breath hitched. I could feel it, smell it, hear it in that tiny pause between us. Then she blinked, and it was over. She tilted her head away, soft but deliberate. I froze, hand half raised, a whisper from my own mind telling me, not now. Not like this. And yet, the thought of leaving, walking out the door, made my chest tighten. We didn't speak. We just sat there, the air heavy with words neither of us would say, the space between us charged with everything almost, everything unfinished, everything that could go wrong or right. Almost. I found her sitting on the park bench that evening, the sky bruised with pink and gray, like it couldn't decide whether to let the day end or linger. She was alone, shoulders slightly hunched, coat pulled tight, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't offered. Steam rose in lazy spirals, and I watched her fingers tighten around it every few seconds. "Hey," I said softly, approaching. She didn't look up immediately, just tilted her head, listening. "Hey," she said finally, voice low, guarded. She shifted, making room, but not much. Set, knees almost brushing, not touching. That inch, that small, impossible space, carried everything we hadn't said. We walked later, side by side on the damp path. Leaves stuck to our shoes, rustling underfoot. I wanted to say something. Something reckless, something honest. But she had been careful, always careful, and I wasn't sure I deserved a breach. "I saw him today," she said suddenly, tone clipped. "Your friend." I froze. Foot caught on a root. "Oh, yeah." My voice betrayed more than it should. She didn't glance at me, only at the darkening pond beside us. "He asked about you. About us." Her words barely carried, but the weight was there. A quiet accusation, an unspoken warning. Something in me twisted, jealousy, maybe, or fear, or the way my chest suddenly felt too tight. "He knows nothing," I murmured. "I mean, he doesn't see what this is." She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Does it even matter? If anyone did," her hand brushed against mine, almost accidental, almost deliberate. I wanted to grab it, to hold it, but I let it go. We sat on the bench again, silence thick between words. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes kept darting to the path, as if someone could walk in and shatter everything. I wanted to reach, to lean closer, but I felt the weight of caution pressing down. I started, then stopped. My mouth couldn't quite carry the words. I don't know if I should." She exhaled, slow and deliberate, and finally looked at me. "Tom," she said softly, like she was letting down a wall she'd built over years. "Do you even know what you want from me?" Her eyes weren't accusatory. They were searching, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. I think I do. I think my voice caught." She reached out, hand hovering an inch from mine, then pulled it back, breath shallow. The pause stretched, quiet, fragile. I wanted to close the distance. I wanted to cross the line, the one we both knew existed but didn't name. My heart pounded in my ears. The park smelled faintly of wet leaves and earth, the light fading around us. And then she asked it, without words, in the tilt of her head, the tension in her fingers, the pause in her breath. "Do we risk it?" I swallowed, hand in my lap, not moving. The question hung between us, unanswered, heavier than the night falling around the bench. This Kutako-style part heightens the tension, shows raw internal conflict, near confession, and ends just before an irreversible step, keeping the slow burn alive. If you like, we can move to part 5, where the story starts to tip toward consequence. The next week, the apartment felt emptier than it had in months. I knocked once, twice, then lingered in the hallway. No answer. Her light was on, faint through the curtains, but she didn't come. I tried the phone, nothing. Not even a read receipt. I walked past the bookstore, thinking maybe she'd be there. The bell jingled behind the counter, but it wasn't her. Just another clerk, polite, unaware. I wandered the streets, coffee growing cold in my hands, imagining she had seen me and decided I wasn't worth the risk, or maybe she had something else entirely. Then the text came. One line. No punctuation, just a word that stopped me. "Sorry." I stared at it for minutes, trying to decode meaning. Was it apology? Regret? A warning? My thumb hovered over the reply button. I didn't write anything. Couldn't. Later, I saw her at the park, but she wasn't alone. A man with graying hair, easy smile, and a presence that filled space she used to occupy. He laughed, she laughed, and it wasn't me she was laughing at. My chest tightened in ways I didn't expect. Not jealousy exactly. Something quieter, heavier. A sense of being misplaced. I kept walking. Past the bench where we had almost crossed lines. Past the bookstore, the apartment. Everything ordinary. Everything ordinary without her now felt hollow. I imagined conversations that would never happen. The coffee she never poured for me. The hand she never brushed against mine. The words we hadn't spoken but carried in our silence. All those small moments became sharp little weights in my chest. At night, I opened my phone, drafted messages I couldn't send. I miss you. Can we talk? I am sorry. Each one stayed unsent. I deleted them. Draft after draft. Unsent. Unread. Abandoned. I wondered if she was thinking of me, or if I had been just a quiet pause in her life. A curiosity, a distraction, something that felt full when it was happening and then disappeared when it wasn't convenient. I walked past her building again that evening. Lights flicked off one by one, shadows stretching across the hallway. My hand lingered on the door handle, but I didn't knock. Not tonight. Not yet. I felt that strange nothingness, heart not broken, mind not fully awake, hope lingering like the smoke of a candle that had been snuffed. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I turned away. The street smelled faintly of wet asphalt, rain from earlier pooling in little mirrors on the pavement. I kept walking, slower than I should, imagining the warmth of her hands, the quiet pull of her gaze. And I knew something had shifted, not over, not resolved, just interrupted. I found her in the kitchen that evening, standing by the sink, hands wrapped around mug. The light was low, spilling in from the small window above, making everything ordinary feel fragile. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should step in or retreat. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers as she held the mug. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. "Tom," she said finally. Not a greeting, not a question. Just my name, quiet, measured. Her eyes met mine, steady. "You came." I nodded, swallowing. "Ah, yeah. I didn't know if I should." She set the mug down and leaned against the counter, careful, deliberate. "And yet, here you are." Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "Why?" I wanted to tell her everything. The nights thinking about her, the drafts I never sent, the way my chest ached when she laughed at someone else's joke. But the truth tangled with caution, guilt, and something unspoken that hovered between us. "I don't know," I said, voice low. "I just couldn't stay away." She studied me for a long beat. Then quietly, almost too softly, she said, "Me too." The words weren't dramatic, but they carried years of restraint, tiny denials, stolen moments in corners of cafes and libraries. I stepped closer, not fully, just enough to shrink the space between us. She didn't pull back. She didn't move forward, just held her ground, letting the silence stretch between what was said and what wasn't. We stood like that, ordinary apartment, low light breathing the same air. I noticed the faint crease near her eyes, the way her hand still trembled slightly. The ordinary details made the moment feel heavier than any words could. I don't want to ruin anything," I admitted, finally, voice catching. "I can't promise it won't hurt. Us, someone else, whatever." She nodded slowly, hand hovering near mine for a heartbeat before brushing it against my sleeve. Tentative, careful. "I know," she whispered, "but we can't live paused forever." I exhaled, tension threading out of me like smoke. That one touch, soft, fleeting, felt like acknowledgement, like acceptance of everything messy and real. We didn't kiss. We didn't lean in more than that fraction of a second. But the quiet was enough. Enough to know we were both here, present, acknowledging what had been impossible to say in drafts, glances, or unsent texts. She tilted her head, faint smile forming. "Okay," she said, simple, human, steady. And that was enough. That soft, ordinary, terrifyingly honest okay. It filled the room more than 1,000 grand gestures ever could. Weeks had passed. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper again, just like the first night I stayed too long, trying not to overstep. But now it felt like hours in small, unspoken ways. The creak of the floorboards when she walked past, the way the kettle whistled exactly when I had learned to time my coffee, the steam curling up from her black mug at exactly 8:47 a.m. I stopped by the park one Saturday, half out of habit, half because I knew she might be there. She was on the same bench, legs crossed, tea in hand, scarf loose around her neck. She looked up, saw me, and smiled. Not the cautious, testing smile from before, but the quiet one that said we're okay here. We didn't talk about the past weeks. Didn't need to. We walked together later, side by side, shoes crunching on damp leaves, conversation light, effortless. She told me about a library display she was setting up. I teased her about the angle of the posters. Nothing monumental, nothing grand. And yet every glance, every pause, felt like our history folded gently into the present. Back at her kitchen, I poured myself black coffee. She stirred her tea, slow, habitual, watching me with that faint crease near her eyes I knew so well. I traced the rim of my mug like I always did. She laughed quietly at something trivial. I reached over, brushed her hand, and she let it linger. No words, no promises, just acknowledgement. A small, human gesture that carried all the weight we had been threading together since the first rainy night at the coffee shop. Sometimes we went to the bench, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes she made lists of books I would never read, and sometimes I left them there, letting her think they were hers alone. Ordinary moments had become ours. The small rituals, tea, coffee, brief touches, shared silences, felt heavy with meaning only we understood. One evening, I caught her staring at the window, watching the streetlights flicker against the wet asphalt. I sat beside her. She didn't say anything, and I didn't either. Just two bodies leaning slightly into each other, quiet enough that the world outside could exist without touching us. Remember the first night? I asked softly, just enough to let a memory breathe. She nodded, eyes crinkling. I do, she said. Everything about it. We didn't speak more. We didn't have to. The coffee was hot, the tea was warm, the bench still waiting in the park if we wanted it, and the clock ticked with our quiet, ordinary lives. And that, I realized, was enough. Not perfection, not fireworks, not declarations. Just presence, just acknowledgement. Just two people who had paused, stumbled, almost lost themselves, and found a quiet, steady rhythm together. I glanced at her hand resting near mine and thought, this is home. Not dramatic, not grand, just ours. And somehow that was everything.